Good evening, everyone. We continue with Isaiah chapter 18. Isaiah chapter 17, where we left off, describes the fall of the Assyrians, where they came to conquer Judah. And that's a prophecy that is regarding the fall and the defeat of Assyria against Hezekiah in one night. But when we come to chapter 18, it moves ahead to talk about something of the future. And so I'll just put up here the reference to Ezekiel chapter 39. We will take a look at Ezekiel chapter 39 a little later. This chapter has only 7 verses, but there is a lot of challenges in our English translation. So let's begin looking at verse 1. It says here, woe to the land shadowed with buzzing wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Now, the first thing we need to know is that this word woe is the Jewish exclamation. It's hoi. Hoi is like a very frustrated kind of an exclamation. And it talks about the land shadowed with buzzing wings. Now, this is a bit of a difficulty. The land is actually shadowed in the word buzzing here. I guess you could say that it is a clamorous or a whirring. It's like the insect's wings that is flapping very quickly and very rapidly, but it actually refers specifically to the wings. Now, what is a land shadowed with wings? And it is described as a land that is beyond the rivers. And then it says here, Ethiopia. And then I'll just strike this off for now. This is a land of Cush. The land of Cush is made up of an ancient uh, ancient kingdom, I would say, in the time of the Egyptians. And then you will find that Cush itself is south of Egypt. Now, if I were to draw the map here, you would find that this would be Egypt. Let me put the river there. And so it is always with reference to the river, and it goes all the way down. And what you'll be seeing at the side here would be the Gulf of Suez. And so somewhere down here, you would find Sudan or South Sudan. You would probably find Ethiopia. And there's another place which is right at the border here. That is Eritrea. This whole area is called Kush. Now, what's happening here is that this is not about the destruction of Cush, but if you recall what I mentioned concerning the book of Isaiah, it is a poetic language. It's presented in poetic language. It's presented in a poetic language that talks about Israel. And so it says that it is beyond the rivers of Cush, which is probably on this side of the land, and it is actually in a shape of a wing. And then it says here, and they would send ambassadors by sea. Now, this idea of ambassadors by sea would be people who would go by sea to survey. So this would be one part in vessels of reed on the waters. These ambassadors by sea would be sent to check out a place. Now, what place is it checking out? And we have some translation problems in verse 2. They would go out in vessels of reeds, and this would be papyrus, or well, what would you call this? Bulrushes. These would be the kind of plants that the Egyptians and this whole area on the Nile, you find that as well, that they use that for pressing into paper. They will use that to build boats as well. And so they become seafaring. So the seafaring could be down the river and into the Mediterranean. And the instruction is to do this, go. Swift messengers. And this is the word messengers. This is malak. They are sent to represent whoever is sending them in the land of Cush. But the intent is to a nation, and we have some problems here, tall and smooth skin. It actually doesn't mean tall and smooth skin. So what does this mean? The first word here is to a nation that is dragged, right? Dragged or pulled. The second word here is plucked. Now, let me explain a little bit of the concepts of these words. Why are they so difficult to translate? The first word here comes from a word to seize, to drag, to pull them away, to take them away. And this would be a picture of sending people away on exile. That's the picture of number one. It is not tall. It is really to draw away, to march them away, as in an exile. The second word here is not smooth. The second word here literally means, I guess you can say, polished by plucking. So let me just explain this. The head of a person is shiny. And the reason why it's shiny is because it is polished. It is polished because all the hair has been plucked away. And so that focus is not an idea of polishing, but the idea is the result of the plucking, that the head is smooth. And so that is why the translator used the word smooth, but the actual word here is plucked. And so the nation that we're talking about right here is a nation that has been dragged away, literally, plucked away. And that's the description in verse 2, that this is a people terrible from their beginning onward. That's to a people terrible. Now, the word terrible here is to be feared. Which means that this preposition depicts this as the victor. And so this nation is pulled away, plucked away, dragged away to a nation, to a people that is terrible from their beginning onward. Now, this description by God, in a very poetic sense, tells us that this is a people And by a people here would be Goy, a non-Israelite nation. And so this nation is Israel taken over to a non-Israel nation. And this nation is to be feared. They are terrible. They are the ones who will come and oppress and press people down. So that's the idea. So you find that it will be the Assyrians, the Babylonians. They will come and drag Israel away from their land. They are bad from the beginning. Now, from the beginning literally means um, as they form themselves into a goyim, they become a nation that is powerful and they will tread down, whose land the rivers divide. And this would be towards the north. And the rivers would be the northern part of the rivers where you've got the rivers Euphrates and Tigris. So this would depict the nations of Babylon after Assyria. Now, what's going to happen if you recall this is a poetic language? Verse 1 and 2 literally is saying, go and check out this nation that's been dragged away. Are they still around? They have been dragged away by a terrible people, a people that they are fearsome, very powerful, and they come and tread down. And they are all at the north. So this is a prophecy very much towards people from the north, right? Babylon and Gog and Magog. And this is where we will refer to Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39. We talked about Assyria yesterday, and today we're talking about the Gog and Magog, northern part towards the Babylon area. In verse 3, it says, all the inhabitants of the world, and it says here, and all the dwellers on the earth. When it talks about this kind of expression, this would be an A and this would be a B. And all the inhabitants of the known world and people who dwell on the land, this would be everybody. And everybody except Israel. And they are told, when he lifts up a banner on the mountains, you see it. Now, the idea of banner is a flag. And when he blows a shofar, you hear it. Now, what does this mean? When it connects through verse 1, the people will be on these little boats, right? They'll be on the boats and they are going out to survey and check out this nation called Israel. What happened to them? They've been plucked out. Can they see a flag on the mountain? Can they hear the shofar? If they do, then it means that they are safe. If they don't, then they are not around. Now, this is a period of time, and many people think of it as towards the end days when Gog and Magog comes down and attacks Israel. And verse 4 describes the finality of the period of Israel. So, for the Lord said to me, and that's Isaiah, God says, I will take my rest. It says, I will take my rest, literally means that it will be a time of no disturbances, And this literally refers to a time where there will be no more wars. So we need to understand that verse 4 describes that finality of a time where there's tranquility. So it is not peace in the sense of shalom, but it is rest. And God says, and I will look down from my dwelling place. Now, this word dwelling place, I guess you could say that um, this is a place that is fixed, a place that is fixed. This will also be a place of foundation. These are all good words to use for this word dwelling place, right? It is not really a dwelling place in that sense. So perhaps I'll just strike it out for now. It is a place that God had fixed, had determined. It is also a place that is a place where God says he will dwell. That's why the word dwelling place, but principally, we can see this as the temple. And to understand this, there is a first temple which Solomon built. There is a second temple that Zerubbabel built. And there is an expected third temple. This is how this statement is read, that God will look down from his place that he has appointed, and that refers to the temple. And he says that it will be a time where there will be clear heat in the sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. And the focus is about harvest. Remember, all these are poetic language. It is at a time where the harvest is ready. It is a time where it is a good environment. And so verse 4 really speaks of the in a poetic way, that it is a time where God says there will be no more war, right here. That my place that I have fixed as a foundation called the temple will be there. And how would this be understood? Now, the Jews actually look at this verse and tell themselves that the temple cannot be built until this is ready, until there's no more wars. And that's how many of the learned sages of Israel, or the Jewish sages, would look at verse 4 to say that the time to build the temple is not until the final war is over. We look at verse 5. He says, for before the harvest. Notice we have the harvest here. And this is the good time for harvest, but it is a time before the harvest, because this idea is to the face of the harvest. When you're looking at the face, it would be the idea before. Before the harvest, and it says, or at the time when when the harvest is past. I think that would be a good way of looking at before the harvest, when the bud is perfect, not harvested yet. It's the plants are getting ready to bear fruit. There is a flower, it's trying to come out, and then the fruit will come thereafter. The sour grape is ripening in the flower. The grape coming out at the time of flower is not sweet. And then God says he will both cut off the sprigs with pruning hooks and take away and cut down the branches. Now, this is an important element to understand. It is before this critical time where God says there's no more war. then this is before the time of tranquility. And so God says he will cut off the sprigs with pruning hooks, take away and cut down the branches. It is at a time where it is not ready for harvest, and yet God says he will do that he will remove the, well, I guess you can say that he will cut down the young branches and chop off all the twigs. This is pruning, right? This is pruning. So you see that this idea of pruning is to cut off the sprigs and the twigs. And this refers to the oppressors, right? This is the oppressors of Gog and Magog. And so from verse 5, I'd like to take us to Ezekiel chapter 39. In Ezekiel chapter 39, towards the later part of the chapter, after the war is completed and Gog and Magog is defeated, God speaks to the Son of Man, and that's Ezekiel. Thus says the Lord God, speak to every sort of bird and to every beast of the field. So we're talking about a very poetic form, calling the animals to assemble yourselves, come gather together from all sides to my sacrificial meal, which I am sacrificing for you. Now, the idea of sacrifice here is that it's been slaughtered, not a typical sacrifice to God, right? This is God saying, I have slaughtered for you a great sacrificial meal on the mountains of Israel, that you may eat flesh and drink blood. You shall eat the flesh of the mighty, drink the blood of the princes of the earth, of rams and lambs, of goats and bulls, all of them fatlings of Bashan. You shall eat fat until you're full, drink blood until you are drunk, at my slaughter meal, which I am slaughtering for you. So understand, sacrifice is a slaughter. You shall be filled at my table with horses, riders, mighty men, all the men of war. And that would be the cleaning up of the Gog and Magog. In verse 21, God says, I will set my glory among the nations. All the nations shall see my judgment, which I have executed, my hand, which I have laid on them. So the house of Israel shall know that I, the Lord their God, from that day forward, the Gentiles, the Goyim, shall know that the house of Israel went into captivity for their iniquity, because they were unfaithful to me. Therefore I hid my face from them. I gave them into the hand of their enemies. They all fell by the sword. According to their uncleanness and their transgressions, I have dealt with them and hidden my face to them. Verse 25, therefore, thus says the Lord God, now I will bring back the captives of Jacob and have mercy on the whole house of Israel. I will be jealous for my holy name, for they have borne their shame and all their unfaithfulness, which they were unfaithful to me when they dwelt safely in their own land, and no one made them afraid. And so God judged them when I brought them back from the peoples, the Goyim, and gathered them out of their enemies' lands, and I am hallowed in them in the sight of many nations. Then they shall know that I am the Lord their God, who sent them into captivity among the nations, but also brought them back to their land, left none of them captive any longer. I will not hide my face from them anymore. I shall have poured out my spirit on the house of Israel, says the Lord God. Now, all of this really leads us up to Isaiah chapter 18 in verse 6. So we see in verse 6, they would be Gog and Magog, and all the nations that came against Israel. will be left together for the mountain birds of prey, for the beasts of the earth. The birds of prey will summer on them. Now, this idea of will summer on them will pass the summer, basically, right? Will wake up from sleep, wake up from sleep, and will feast on them. Spring is when they are still asleep, and all the birds of the earth will winter on them and eat to sleep. So all of these basically is telling us about Ezekiel chapter 39 from verse 17 onwards. That this is where God says, I have made a sacrificial meal for you. So this really resonates with the fact that when God brings the nation back to the land, they don't need to look for a flag. They can see that God is going to end all wars. Now, in that time, a present will be brought to the Lord of hosts. Now, this word, a present, verse 7, this will be a gift, right? A gift for homage. Now, this is a very Eastern practice. When people come to visit you, they bring a gift. And so this would be at a time where there are people who are not Israel will come to offer a gift to God. And they will be brought to the Lord of hosts. And where will God be in his temple? This is how it's described. And in Jerusalem. And that's why the sages believe that it is after all the wars when God will sit back in the place where he has appointed in Jerusalem, and that would be the time where the third temple will be constructed. And once that is constructed, at that time, people will come and bring gifts of homage to come to adore God. That's how verse 7 is spoken of. And from a people, again, we have seen this in verse 2, tall and smooth of skin. Again, this would be somebody who's been dragged away, somebody who's been plucked, like hair plucked out of the head, smooth on the head. From a people, and this would be Israel. Israel will bring presents to God. And then it also says, and from, now this time we are seeing in verse 2, we are talking about sending them to a people who is to be feared. So this word, to a people who is to be feared, would be a goy. This would be a non-Israel to be feared. So in verse 2, it is to. In verse 7, it is from. From their beginning onward, when they were starting, they were already bad. A nation powerful and treading down. Now, this whole idea from a people, this would not be Goy. I'm sorry. From a people, and this would be this would be a people, they are the same. A nation, right, is also a nation to be feared from their beginning onward, and then a Goy, powerful and treading down, whose land the waters divide. Now, this one here is an A, and this is a B. This nation would be the Gog and Magog. And it represents all the Goyim who will bring presents to God in his temple. And this will be the two. Notice these prepositions are important. This is from, and so the present is from and to God. And where is God? To the place of the name of Jehovah Tzevaot. And it says to Mount Zion, which is Jerusalem. Now, with this, you find that this is really talking about the ultimate future where the temple is already built. So we see this as a prophecy concerning way down beyond the Babylonians, and will be to think of a time where there will be no more wars. Now, before we finish, I'd like to bring us back to Isaiah chapter 2, and then we will wrap up from there. Now, we are at Isaiah chapter 2, and this is a prophecy that Isaiah had mentioned. Now, again, I also want to mention to us that although the book of Isaiah is written in poetic language, it is also not in sequence as we would have in a historical narrative. So it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house, and this assumes the presence of a temple, shall be established on top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations. So this is something that we have done already. And it says here, and all the Goyim, I think you can see this, all the Goyim, the non-Israelites, shall flow to it. So this gives us a concept that if this is the temple, the people are going to stream up. So it is that whole idea. The people are so many, and it looks like bobbing heads streaming up to the mountain. Is a very unusual flow. Usually you flow downhill. So it is a poetic language. And verse 3, it says, many people shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of Jehovah, to the house of the God of Abraham, of Jacob. So it's about the house of God that is on the mountaintop. And God will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the Torah and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge between the nations. And this idea, the nations would be the Goyim, and will rebuke many people. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation, and that means Goy, the singular, shall not lift up sword against nation, which is another Goy, and neither shall they learn of war anymore. And basically, it's teaching us that there will be a time of no war. And so, chapter 18, verse 7, is describing why they are going to bring a homage, a present. And so, you find that there will be people from the Goyim and people from Israel, and both will go up to the house of the Lord. And now we return back to verse 7. And just to recap very quickly, they are going to bring a present. And this is to God. And again, this idea of tall and smooth is not there. It is from a people, and this would be Israel. And from a people terrible, from their beginning, a nation powerful, this is the Goy, the non-Israelite. And these will be the picture of Gog and Magog. And they are going up to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts and to Mount Zion. And that will resonate well with Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 to 4. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.